Please teach your daughters not to measure strength by how much pain they can endure. By Sahusi. Hey, it's Tuesday. Another Tuesday, another podcast episode. It's Toya Washington here. Hoping that you guys are doing really well. Thank you so much for downloading my latest episode of the Toy Talks podcast. This episode is called Work Etiquette. I had an interview today. It's my first interview over video conference call. I switched the video off, but as I was recording it, I was taking notes about things that I think we all take for granted, that we all know, but we actually don't. And as the pandemic has changed the way fundamentally business operate commercially, I think that it set the tone of how they're going to be doing interviews going forward. There is no justification that every interview requires a potential employee to get on the train and spend all that money to get into a face-to-face interview when it could easily be done at a cost-saving situation where they could just do it online. A lot of organisations do subscribe to conference calls or video conferencing as an option for interviewing, and other organisations are now obviously being humbled to get with the programme. So I want to talk about work etiquette from a perspective of actually being physically in the office, and also this new way of life that we're entering into, and work etiquette in terms of video conference calls, in interviews and things like that. And also as well, obviously, I want to touch on a few points about my interview that I had today, which went really, really well. But I shared on Instagram Live a few of the things that I had to navigate in the interview, and I thought it'd be really good if I use this episode to explore some of them, in the hope that it will help a lot of you who are either already in work and need to improve some of your work etiquette, or those of you who are looking for new roles and are now acclimatizing to the new commercial space that is the world of work. I think there's certain things that go without saying. When you're sending an email, don't put in writing what you wouldn't want other people to read. I think that people take for granted instantaneous communication, and people are quite quick to put all their emotions into an email, and it'll come back to haunt you. We've discussed it in previous episodes. But more importantly, when you're being sent an email, you don't know if someone's been blind copied into those emails. I've been in situations in my early career where people blind copied into an email, and then maybe I just hit reply as opposed to reply all. And the person who initially sent me the email then accidentally adds that same person back in, but instead of putting them on BCC, puts them on CC. Don't underestimate how in touch your line manager is with HR and the things that they draw into HR's attention without actually making you aware that they're doing so. And I think you should not put something in an email that you're not willing to share with everybody else. And I say that because 9 times out of 10, if you are dealing with maybe a complaint or an issue in the office, don't ever think for a moment that your manager is being discreet. I'm yet to meet a manager who is discreet enough to not share with other members of staff. There are some managers who are understanding of the fact that they're in a senior role and their role is to manage. But let's really be honest, a lot of the managers that we're dealing with have their own emotional traumas that they're working through within the workplace, and that also includes petty behaviour and just unprofessionalism as a whole. And what they do is they hide behind their titles to justify their behaviour. So there are things that other people will put in writing that they probably shouldn't. Like, I think people underestimate the power of an audit trail. Don't put in writing something that you're not prepared for other people to read, and take all your emotion out of emails. I want to also talk about, when we talk about work etiquette, a bit about social media. Now, when I first went into the world of work, there was no such thing as social media. I think it was like High Five. And now it's imploded, and you have LinkedIn, you've got Instagram, Twitter, you name it, TikToks or whatever. And what I tend to find is you have 2 bunches of people. So the first bunch are quite open, and they're quite happy to put even their Twitter handle on their CV. You go take it a step further, they put their picture on there. I don't understand. I remember when I was shortlisting some for a particular role, I was shortlisting people. If you put your picture on your CV and you're dealing with a workplace or the work environment where there is clear prejudice and stereotypes. Why would you buy into those stereotypes by putting your picture on your CV? I've never heard anything that's so ridiculous. Why would you put your Twitter handle? Don't you think that you're opening up the opportunity for your organisation to spy on you? And when something could be so innocent and they could use it as a way to manage you out if they really want to manage you out. Now you've given them your social media handles, you're giving them access to your personal life. I remember in a role I was in not too long ago, and there was a lady that I worked with that I got on really, really well with, and actually she's actually a good friend of mine now. And we were on each other's Instagram, and obviously she was a bit like me, keeping work separate from personal life. But what I didn't realise is that she really wasn't like me, because there were other people in the organisation that she had on her Instagram. So obviously Instagram is just eggs up in it. So it said like suggest a friend. And there was another girl in the office, and she could see that I was on my friend's, Instagram. And she sent me at that time, she started following me because at that time my profile was open. And obviously I don't want really people knowing like my personal life and things I do on like outside of work. It's no one's business. Do you understand? And as soon as she did it, I blocked her. Then I come into work and the girl had the cheek to say to me, she goes, "Oh, I saw you were on Alicia's Instagram. I tried to add you and then you blocked me." I was like, "Yeah, I did." And that was the end of that conversation. And the reason I did that, and I know some of you might think, "Oh, Toya, that's a bit harsh," but it isn't harsh. I know of people who have maybe, put something on their social media handle and they're thinking quite innocently that they've done that outside of work and it's come to haunt them. Or having people you work with, your so-called colleagues, snooping on you and providing information as to your whereabouts, maybe outside of work, to your boss, who maybe doesn't like you and is trying to manage you out, and you've got this secret spy within in your team filtering information about your Instagram page. It just brings unwarranted attention that I don't think you need. I think people struggle with separating work and your personal life. They're not one. They only become one when you allow it to become one. And for me personally, my work is Monday to Friday and my personal life is on the weekend. And my personal life is when I'm not in the office, i.e. from 5 o'clock. So I don't see why you should be on my social media, because I see you every day. So why are you there? I don't agree or subscribe to WhatsApp groups, as a lot of you know, like work WhatsApp groups. I don't like the idea that someone can easily access me. It makes me feel quite uncomfortable, if I'm being completely honest. I think that, when we're talking about setting boundaries and things like that, it's things like this. How much access do you allow people to have to you? And a lot of people that struggle with boundaries in their personal life will inadvertently struggle with boundaries in their work life. It's as simple as that. I mean, I told you guys about Mariama, and it was, I'm just trying to find the episode where I spoke about it. That was They See You Before They Hear You. That's episode 11 in season 1, about Mariama and kind of what she went through in a particular role. And she was on their WhatsApp groups and everything. And when it was time for them to get rid of her, the way they iced her out nicely, and I definitely believe that there was something that she had shared in that WhatsApp group that was outside the realms of professionalism, and they used that to get her out. So just be careful of how much access you allow your employers. And when I say your employers, it's also your colleagues to have to you. Nothing good has ever come out of people having too much access other than disrespect and a lack of boundaries. When you're putting meetings into people's diary, I find it really disrespectful when people put in meetings for like 8:39. So after battling, and risking my life on the underground, then I must now run into the office and prepare for an 8:30 or 9 o'clock meeting. Like, make it make sense. And sometimes it's not always managers that request it, it's other colleagues. I always had this thing, I let people know from the jump. I was like, I don't do 8:30 or 9 o'clock meetings if you want me to be productive. I'm generally not a morning person. I need coffee as well in the morning, especially after battling on the tubes. But I just think that if you're going into an organisation, maybe you're unaware. It irritates people. And in general, anyone who maybe finds it difficult to get into work, if they've got a long commute, to have then a meeting at 9 o'clock or 8:30, it's just bloody rude. If you want to piss me off, do that. But I don't like that shit. In terms of work etiquette, I wanted to talk about handover and like new starter induction. So let's start first with new starter inductions. It's not a legal obligation that an organisation is going to give you an induction. In fact, you should be really, really, really happy and think yourself lucky to be given that. Some people get given a laptop. Sometimes not even the laptop won't even be prepared for you when you go there. And it's like when you start, they knew the start date and they get surprised when they see you coming on the start date. It's a bit mad. So I'd always say inductions are not a given, but it's a good practice to have an induction. And I think even if you, during your interview process, if that's something that's important to you, then you ask them, what does your induction look like for the first 2 weeks of a new starter? You know, these are all things you can like deal with up front through an interview process. I'm less concerned about that for myself, just because I know I've always had to hit the ground running. So obviously you want the basics like the shared drive and HR, payroll, all of that. But in terms of the actual job, sometimes I think it's often expecting too much for organisations, unfortunately, to give you an induction. But what about handovers? It's kind of the same. So I don't think you can expect to always get a handover. And sometimes you may be leaving after you may be joining after the person you're replacing has already left. Ideally, you should do handovers. I mean, in my current contract, I'm leaving and I did a robust handover. In fact, I pride myself in doing a handover because it's also a demonstration of all the stuff that you've been doing. And to an extent, an organisation looks at it like a transfer of knowledge, and it's not. It's basically, these are where all the critical things that I was dealing with currently sit, and even do a recommendation of what needs to happen going forward. But for me, I always think it's really professional to do a handover, but don't be shocked if you go into an organisation and don't get one. There's no obligation for them to provide you with one. It's just a professional courtesy. And I do it because I pride myself on my job. I pride myself on what I do and what I deliver in an organisation. And I know all too well, being on the receiving end of not ever receiving handovers, how important it is for somebody who's coming in after you. It's quite a selfless thing to do, but no one can make it seem like an obligation that you have to do. It's nowhere in your contractual terms. It's just professionally, it's professionally encouraged, if you like. That's probably a better way of doing it. One thing that I will say is probably orgasmic, and I use that word know full well like people are going to be like, oh, what I find orgasmic is a resignation. When you know you are ready to leave a company, do you know how gratifying that is in just the feeling alone? I've worked in organisations before where I really hated working there. And something I used to do as a form of therapy would be to start writing my resignation before I have found somewhere to go. So at the point in which I've decided I'm going to leave, I start drafting my resignation. And it's an opportunity for me to just take it off my chest, take it off my head and put it on a paper. It doesn't go anywhere. And usually it'll be like 3 or 4 pages of ranting, really. But at the point I'm ready to leave, i.e. I found a new job, I've made that decision, I'm going to go. When I'm revising that resignation, it usually ends up being less than a paragraph. And I think partly it's because you already know that you're leaving. And I don't necessarily leave somewhere with axes to grind. I think a lot of people use resignations as a weapon. They're so emotionally invested in this resignation and they're going to tell the organisation exactly what they think. It never goes down well. At the end of the day, I dealt with it in my last episode about myths of the workplace. Like, an organisation can't give you a bad reference, and they won't do, for legal reasons and possible ramifications down the line. But they don't actually have to give you any reference. They could say no. It's their right to do so. And I just think, my dad always used to say to me, whenever you leave somewhere, leave in peace. And I never used to understand what that meant, because it was like, especially when I was in my 20s, I loved the theatrics of it. But I later realised that you never know when you're going to meet people in the industry. Like, the industry that I'm in contracts and procurement is so small that, in fact, the likelihood and the probability of meeting somebody who you've previously worked with is quite high. But in any case, because the industry is small, people get to know names and things like that. And it could just be maybe a work conference where someone mentions your name or a company or whatever, and it just takes one negative thing that someone needs to say about you, and that could literally smear your career or smear your current employment experience. So I think it's really important to resign with dignity, is my thing. And resign in such a way that if you had to go back, or if there was a situation whereby maybe you needed something from them, that you could ask. It's not always going to be the case, and there are going to be some places that no matter how much you try to leave with dignity, they want the drama of it. And that's fine, but I think it's important to see a resignation as a strength. And for me, I do, like, I see it as so gratifying that I've chosen to leave for better things, or I've chosen to leave on my own terms and resign it. Especially because for me, I always find they're shocked. They're shocked that someone is resigning. It's like they think that their workplace is the best place before sliced bread. These times when I was talking to you about promotions and things like that, you were looking at me like I was crazy. What did you think was going to happen? Obviously, somebody wants more for themselves, for themselves, or from their career, they're going to look outside. As soon as somebody comes to management or comes to a hiring manager and has a conversation about progression, and you basically don't allow that conversation to be had, or you don't encourage promotions and things like that, it's only a matter of time before that employee goes and finds something else. And that's always been the case with me. Like, I always try and raise stuff because no one really wants to start all over again all the time. But when it comes to my career, I've been quite selfish in ensuring that I haven't allowed my career to be governed by problematic managers who either look at me as somebody who makes them look good, so they want to keep me around, or somebody who wants me to stay stagnant because they're not prepared to open their mind to the possibility that I could want more for myself. But it leads me also to a quick story I wanted to tell you about. There's one girl called Sonia, and Sonia had been working in the organisation probably 4 months. I think she was promised a lot at interview stage. So she come in like a bull in a china shop, thinking that she was going to be exposed to all this stuff and she was going to be promoted. And as a fellow black woman, she was a lot younger than me. I did take her under my wing, partly because she worked in my department, but also as well, I think that whenever you have a young mind that is eager to learn, it's important that you nurture it. I think it's important. But in my organisation, it wasn't about that. They didn't have that personal touch on wanting to nurture people, but they didn't realise that if you nurture interest, you get loyalty. And when an employee is loyal to you, they feel like also you're investing in them. That is a really harmonious relationship. But the organisation we were in weren't like that. Long story short, Sonia became a thorn in everyone's backside in the team because she was just kind of relentless. She never took the time to just take a breath or to take in what was actually happening. And several times after she'd passed her probation, she was asking and pushing for a promotion. But the organisation and the team itself were going through so much. It just wasn't the right time. And as much as possible, I try and train her and things like that. But I quickly realised that she was also after my job, but in a way whereby if I was on leave, she would be working on my stuff to get the recognition to further support why she should be promoted. But the point is, I don't have to fight for what is already mine. And I never wanted to allow her to pick me off against her because I didn't want to have to be the one to put her in her place. I just thought, you know what, at the end of the day, people can see how she is and what she's doing. I am a subject matter expert in what I do. And the reality is if she continues this way, she's going to make a mistake. And that's actually what happened. Somebody in the team was on leave and she worked on something she didn't have any authority to. And she messed up that contract. So by the time the person come back, they had to fix it. But equally, they had to report to the head of department about what had gone wrong and had to actually be quite frank and say that Sonia had messed it up and had no authority to work on it, etc. Anyway, push came to shove and I think Sonia got really frustrated, and I think the reality of the fact that they had made her all these promises at the start when they offered her the role and none of it was going to ever materialise. And I had to have quite frank conversations with her as well because it was interfering with how I was doing my job as well. And my thing is, if you want to mess up your own career prospects, that's great. But when you start becoming a thorn in my backside, I'm going to pull you out. So anyway, long story short, she told me that she had a job interview for a particular organisation and she asked me if I could prep her. So I did. And she told me if I could cover for her that she was going to go to that interview during lunch and she'll be late back. So obviously I did cover for her. I had no issue with that. So when she got back into the office, she told me how... when she got back to the office, she didn't tell me how it went. The next day now, I was doing some staff training with a member of staff who had newly joined the team. And we was in a meeting room. As we're sitting in the meeting room going through everything, one of the people from our team comes in and says, "Hi, Toya, I'm sorry to disturb you. Have you seen Sonia?" I said, "No, I haven't seen Sonia." She said, "Oh, because she's looking for you. In fact, she said she wants to talk to the whole team." So I'm like, "What?" She said, "Yeah, She goes, actually, do you mind if we use this room? Because we've been looking for a room. So I was like, okay. Bearing in mind, I was training someone, but I was like, it was just so random. I was like, all right, cool, whatever. 10 minutes later, Sonia walks in. And she says, guys, I just want to make an announcement to the team. I had an interview and I got offered the job and I'm going to accept. So I just want you all to know I'm leaving. And I want to tell you guys before everyone else. And I looked at this girl and I thought, she's just got such a long way to go. This is not how you behave in a professional environment. The same way you had the thought to keep the interview private is the same way she should have managed this privately. And she's telling the team like she thinks everyone's going to be happy for her. But lo and behold, there's somebody in the team that wanted to leave and had been trying to leave for a long time, couldn't get a role. And she's looking at Sonia now, who is that much younger than her, but also not as experienced as her. So that built resentment. And equally as well, I don't know why she had to do that public announcement. I never understand that. Before long, the next day, the head of department found out that Sonia was resigning before she actually had the time to do it herself. So she said that when she went she was in a corridor and he looked at her and said, have you got anything you want to tell me? And she's like, no. And he's like, are you sure about that? So then she came running back to where the team was sitting, saying that she feels like somebody from the team has told him of her plans to leave. And in my head, I was like, well, what did you expect? And in fact, I even said to her, I said, don't look down this way because I ain't got time for that. But it's the fact that she had no self-awareness and she didn't handle it well at all. And it was going to end badly, but I had done my part. She'd asked me to help with the interview. I'd done it, but I'm not going out on a limb with somebody who is literally convicted in setting themselves up. That's just not going to happen. So when this girl did now resign, the way this man lambasted her and basically told her about herself and her unprofessionalism, her lack of professional courtesy and etiquette, he gave her a washing down. I know this because she came back to tell all of us. So it was around the time when I was leaving as well, because I was a perm there previously, and then I'd come back as a contractor. I think I told you guys about that role. So anyway, I come back now. I was called into a meeting with the head of department, and do you know what he said to me? He was like, you know what, Toya, I really appreciate everything that you've done for the team, and leaving and coming back here as a contractor and everything you've done. But honestly, I'm quite disgusted. It's like I'm really sorry because I know I'm in a bad mood and I don't want to, it to divert the conversation or the meeting that we're having. But Sonia has dealt with this really, really badly, her resignation. He goes, you'll see what will happen when they ask us to give her a reference. If they call up and the call is directed to me, then I'll be telling them exactly what they've let themselves in for. If it's a letter they need or confirmation by reference, we just won't give one because we don't have to. Now, he has no reason why he's telling me this, but it was an insight in how a lot of these managers in HR think. This is a white man basically using his white privilege, or telling me how he's about to use his white privilege on this young black woman. Now, if this black woman had any self-awareness of just who she is, or the fact that she is a black woman, and often we enter roles with the odds stacked against us, she wouldn't have behaved in that way. But when we talk about professional etiquette, don't get me wrong, I think she was just genuinely just really excited and just relieved to get out of that organisation. But there's ways of doing things and there's ways of managing things. You don't have to tell everybody your plans. When I'm leaving, it's always a shock because there must be maybe there's one person that might even know my plan, but even then they won't even know when I'm going to do it. You understand what I'm trying to say? Well, often I just don't say anything. Like, it's not everything you have to share. And she was excited as well and relieved, and I get all of that, but she's not thinking about the fact that she still has to work her notice. And it was so uncomfortable for her because that man made sure that it was uncomfortable for her. The snide comments, the digs, embarrassing her and things like that. And she, towards the end, she basically said to them, listen, I've got some annual leave and I'd like to use that in lieu of my notice. Because she made it so that it was unworkable for her to continue staying there because she shot herself in the foot. And I just think that we just need to be a bit more forthright in ensuring that we are also resigning safely. There's a way to resign safely, and there's ways of resigning, and even with the best intentions, people are going to take it the wrong way. But don't fuel into that, don't feed into that. You are responsible for your career and your employment. You're equally responsible for the interactions that you have with people too. And did Sonia learn from it? Probably not. She's going to do the same thing, and I know this because there was no level of remorse or understanding retrospectively of how she could have changed or done it better. She was just happy to get out. And I warned her, I said, if you don't learn from whatever's happened here, it's going to repeat itself again. But it might be worse, because I've learned from what you have done and how you've managed things, so that I ensure that I continue to try at least, to leave in a peaceful manner. And I said, there's nothing wrong with leaving a place peacefully. I still stay in contact with her now and again. She'll send me messages and we check up on each other. But, I keep a bit of distance there, because I feel like there's a lot of growth that needs to happen, and it needs to be a personal journey outside of me. And you know what they say, when you think you know everything, the world has a way of just humbling you. Talk a little bit about the interview that I had today, the video conference call interview that I had, and more so from a perspective of how to prepare for the new way in which people are interviewing now. And I say new tentatively because it's not really new, is it? But you know what I mean, in response to the current pandemic that we find ourselves in. So I apparently applied for a role. I don't even remember applying for this role, but clearly I did. And they came back to me and they said to me that they will do it via video conference. So they wanted to do it via Google Hangout. I've never done Google Hangout before. They sent the calendar invite, put it in my calendar and accepted. And I went ahead and thought, you know what? Because I'm a contractor as well, I think it's really important that I have certain conferencing software on my work laptop. So I've got a business laptop that I use. So I downloaded Skype for Business, and I created an email address, a personal email address for Google Hangout. And then obviously I've got my other personal iCloud email address as well. And I thought, okay, this is how I'm going to prep for it. And I get to test the link and make sure it works, make sure the sound quality is really good on my laptop as well, because you don't really want to do a video conference on the phone unless you really have to. And I didn't want to use my iPad because I knew I was going to use the iPad on the day of the interview. So I think it's really important that you make sure going forward that if you are doing these video conference interviews or video conference calls, whatever they are, that you make sure you download Skype for Business. Zoom is what people are using, but the security features are in question at the moment about data protection and things like that. But I just think going forward, I think it's important in prepping for these interviews that you enable yourself from a technology point of view to be accessed through those modes. So that's what I done. Also as well, on the day of the interview, which was obviously today, I prepared by making sure that I had opened my laptop, everything was charged. I had the charger in the laptop at least 20 minutes before. And then I have my iPad. On my iPad, I made sure I had my up-to-date CV in case there were certain questions they wanted to raise. And also as well, I've worked for different organisations, delivered different things, and you're not going to remember it off by heart. It's not a test, it's not an examination. So utilize the fact that you are behind a screen. Now, my other thing was I didn't want to use the video function. I just used the audio, and that's partly because, number one, people have preconceived stereotypes. Number two, I'm in my house and I'm comfortable. I don't want to be wearing makeup and getting ready to do a video conference meeting in my home when I could just do it audio. Now, if she had said, oh, could you put the video on, I'd be like, is there a reason why I should put the video on? Or is there a reason why you require the video? I would ask that question. I wouldn't reject it, but I would ask the reasoning, because effectively seeing me is not important. It's what I say, isn't it? So I turned my video off, and lucky for me, her video was off anyway. So there was no requirement for me to have the video on. So yeah, as I said, I had my iPad and I had my CV on the iPad. And I think what's also really important, I say this all the time, even when you're in employment, you're going to these meetings, make sure you have a notepad and pen. It's really important to note things down. And I will tell you how I use those notes and why I had noted things down in a little while. I also had a cup of coffee, and I had some water. I had my water bottle. Sorry, I just went to go and get my water bottle. Because you never know what happened. Maybe my throat gets dry or whatever. So to make sure I had some water. And utilising the interviewer. So I did an Instagram live quickly about this after the interview, and I was saying, like, interview styles are different for different people. But I think the higher and the more senior you get, the less likely you're asked certain questions. Now, in the event that you're asked a question like, oh, have you researched the company? Can you tell me what you found out about the company? I ain't got no time for that, because I'm not a historian. Do you understand? And I've got a lot going on in my head, and I can't remember my own CV. I should now remember what your business does. So when the woman asked me that question, I said to her, well, I did have an opportunity to go through your website and I had a bit of a browse. However, obviously you live and breathe this company, so it'd be really interesting to hear from you what your company does and where their bread and butter is. She took such pride in telling me everything she knows about the business. And now, because I had my notepad and pen, all the things that were important to the role that I'd applied for are the notes that I was taking. So, for instance, they have offices in India, Portugal, London, 2 in the US, and they're open 1 in Mexico. I know where they're based. I know who are their big clients. I know that they signed a high value contract in this year with a particular organization. I understand their business model, and also what their focuses are for 2020, 2021. And all of that came from knowing how to ask and utilize the interviewer. As the interview proceeded, she asked me a bit about my CV. Now, she asked me what my current situation was as a contractor, etc., which is fair questions to ask. And then something that I'd realised with the role, because obviously, even though I don't remember applying, when I did look at the company and make sure that they had a website, corporate responsibility and things like that, I could see that the role that I had applied for, unfortunately, didn't have a seniority marked on it. And reading the job description, I could see it was quite senior, but I couldn't gauge on what level of seniority. So I asked the interviewer, I said to her, with this particular role, I was just wondering who's the direct reporting line. And she said that the role would be reporting into the CFO. I said, okay, and what does the org structure look like for that particular team? Now, the reason why I was asking those questions is so that I could start pricing up what I think the role is worth, because I'd already benchmarked it, but I needed to understand from an organizational perspective how senior this role is, because it will command a certain amount of money. Lo and behold, when one was applying for this role, it didn't have the salary on it. And I've spoken about this before on Instagram Live about negotiating and things like that, but I know the reason is because they want someone to come and suggest how much, right? They have a budget. Most organizations have a budget. But the reality is I needed to find out from her how much they were willing to pay. And the only way I could find that out is to gauge the seniority. So obviously, once she had told me the reporting line and what the org chart for that team looks like, I was able to price the role, having previously benchmarked and done all the research that I needed to do. But I said to her, it's a tentative figure. She says, what do you mean? I said, well, I'm going to have to speak to the CFO if I get to the next stage. And you said to me that the lady who is leaving will be also in stage 2 interview. She said, yes. Well, I would need to know then what an average day looks like for her. What does a non-average day look like for her? And on par, how many contracts she deals with on a day-to-day basis. Because that will then give me an opportunity to make sure that I've actually, number one, priced the role at the right salary bracket, but also that I've taken into consideration how flexible this role is and how demanding it would be. And she said, you know what, Toya, that is a very, very pragmatic way to look at it. So I will take this as an absolute minimum for now. Rather than get sign off on it, what I will do is have another conversation with you when you get to a second stage interview. So from that, what I've found out from her is I will be getting to a second stage interview. And number 2, that she finds my salary requirements reasonable, but she knows that it could possibly change. So she then knows that we have already started the negotiation before we've formally done one. So that was really important for me to communicate. Now, through this pandemic of the coronavirus, I think something that's become even more evident is the requirement and the need for organisations to be flexible. And it also means that I need an organisation that's equally going to be flexible. And what do I mean by flexibility? Well, this is the same question that the interviewer asked me. And I said to her, well, for instance, we're dealing with a pandemic now. So all those inflexible companies have now had to adapt and become flexible. So for me, I need a role that I can work 2 days at home, 2 days a week from home, because productivity does not require you to be in an office setting. If you're good at your job, you should be productive wherever you work. Wherever you are, you should be productive. And actually, working from home demonstrates and puts an onus on the person working from home to be able to churn out and do the work as they're supposed to. And more importantly, I think the more flexible you are with your employees, the more flexible and the more adaptable your employees become. She completely agreed. And she said that this would be something that she would have to get signed off. I said, completely understand it. I said, obviously, when you join a company newly, for the first few weeks at least, you have to be in the office because that's your induction, right? And your training and you're learning things. But I would ensure that anything that is agreed prior contract will have to be in the contract. And I'm just saying this to you guys, but I know that as part of my negotiation, anything I agree will have to be in the contract. So if I'm doing 2 days a week from home, it's going into the contract subject to review after 12 months and things like that, because these are now things that are now essential in the commercial space. If you have learned anything from this pandemic, it's the leverage that employees have. You guys have a lot more leverage than you realize, and a lot more leverage than companies feel comfortable to acknowledge, because leverage gives you bargaining strength. Bargaining strength gives you power, and power gives you choice. Choice gives you options. Options give you flexibility. And that is really how I think this pandemic is empowering employees, but people don't realize it. There's a lot of people not realizing, and I think part of it is because a lot of people have been made redundant. The job market's quite slow, so you're almost forced to accept whatever you see, and I don't think that's the right approach. I think you should still credit yourself with the value of the skill sets that you have and the experience you have, and use that as an opportunity to leverage and negotiate potential roles, as I have done. She did mention a test, and I said this on my Instagram live. You get to a certain point in your career, you don't do tests no more. I'm so sorry. In my early 20s, I definitely did do tests because I didn't really have choice. I had no choice because I was just trying to get a job and get experience. But when you have accumulated the level of experience I have through working for organisations like Goldman Sachs, like PricewaterhouseCoopers, who didn't do any tests when I joined. Why now am I doing tests for this company? Like, what the hell? And I said to her, if it's a test about, or it's a part of an interview process about how I'd approach certain contracts, then that makes sense, but that's not a test. But if you're now talking about a formal test, unfortunately, because of the level of seniority that I am at and the experience I've acquired, I don't think that is acceptable. And she was like, oh, no, I completely understand. No, that's not what I meant. Maybe test is the wrong word. You know, sometimes you have to steer an interview in the way you need it to go. And I needed to make sure from Jump Street that I was clear about what my expectations were, but do it in a professional way. Remember, this whole episode is about professional etiquette and how you put things forward and put things across, and the relationships that you build in the workplace. Now, who knows? I might not get this role. I may not be asked to go to second interview. But interviews are so important. Practicing interviews. On my Instagram live, I was asked about how did I get so good at interviews. Well, I wasn't born good with interviews. I've had a lot of interviews, and I've been able to learn from past interviews and experiences, maybe not getting the job, people turning up late, people being disrespectful, my CV being tossed and marked up with red pen. I've been through a lot. So I'm at a point now where I feel like I'm able to interview on terms that make sense, because I'm coming with all that experience and all that knowledge. And even if I didn't have the experience, I am confident in my skill set. And part of interviews is being confident in your skill set. The fact that they've invited you for interview means there's something in your CV that they've seen that they're drawn to. They have a requirement that they need to fill. And every time they do interviews, they're losing a lot of money because they're spending a lot of money through the interview process. Sometimes they're using agencies that they're going to have to pay. Like, it's a lot of money. So don't just see an interview as something that is one-sided. I have always said this. My Toy Talks live event, I said this. In my Snapchats, I say this. My Instagram lives, I say this. An interview is two-way. It is not one-way anymore. It's an opportunity for you to interview the organisation the same way that this is the opportunity for them to interview you, and utilising that. So I've walked away with 2 sides of A4 of information that I've taken from that interview. So as we progressed and the interview was nearing a close, she asked me, if I had any other questions. And I had 2 other questions. I said, what benefit packages do you offer? And she says, when you say benefits, is there anything in particular? I said, well, I don't consider a work mobile phone or a work laptop a benefit. And in fact, if you don't have a work laptop, you can't do the job. And having a work mobile is not a benefit, because that's just giving an organisation easier access to you. I consider benefit as contributing to your pension, private healthcare, private dental care, those things, a company card, those things are what I consider benefits. And she says, yes, we do private healthcare, and obviously we can explore what other benefits you would probably require. I said, that's fine. She said, is there anything else? Because she said there was one more question. I said, actually, there is. I said, well, you said the CFO, that's the direct reporting line. She said, yes. I said, well, having interacted with the CFO, as you've told me that you've worked with him for a few years, would you mind telling me some of his strengths, and maybe just 1 or 2 strengths, and maybe something negative that somebody would have to consider when working or being a direct report to a CFO? She didn't know what to say to me. She was like, well, okay. And she's told me, now, you have to accept that in an interview, you're going to be told a minimum of 2 lies. This is how I approach it. It's a minimum of 2 lies. So with that question, I knew that she'd already told me a lie previously about the reasons why the person was leaving that would be replaced. So in that, she had said to me that they had been offered a role from where they used to work before. So the person's going back to an old role for more money. And I said, well, how long has that person been in the current role where you are now? She said 3 years. So the 3 years was the truth. But the reasons why that person's leaving, the reason she gave me was a lie. That don't make no sense. So after 3 years, you've decided now to go back to your old place because they've asked you to come back. So the last 3 years, they never asked you to come back. That don't make no sense. So the second lie she told me now was to do with the question about the CFO. So she said to me that the CFO really wants to know the person behind the role. So they're more interested in like personality, and if the person's a personality fit, and kind of what drives and motivates that person. And she said to me, the negative is that sometimes he takes on a lot, therefore he feels personally responsible for things. So that tells me he's a micromanager. So the lies where she told me about him being personable, I don't believe that whatsoever, because I've never met a CFO that has enough time to be personable. And it was in direct contradiction to what she said about him taking on a lot. Because if you're taking on a lot, clearly you don't have enough time. If you don't have enough time, how are you going to get to know somebody and know what drives and motivates them? And also as well, I don't want to be micromanaged. So when I get to the second stage, I will ask him about his management style in the full knowledge that I've already had a conversation with HR who've told me some of his positives and some of his weaknesses. I can't be senior and be micromanaged. It's in direct contradiction of each other. You either trust somebody to go out and do the role and make sure that person feels supported, or you micromanage them down to the ground. And I have worked in organisations where I've been micromanaged, and it has literally led to anxiety, it's led to me leaving, it's led to everything negative. And I think that there's some people that need to be micromanaged because they can't and they don't have the professional maturity to work independently. But there's also equally people who thrive in just being able to deliver and therefore don't require micromanagement. We're seeing a lot of managers now in response to the pandemic that is the coronavirus who can't cope with this remote working. I think I told you guys in a previous episode, there was one lady that said to me that HR had sent out an email making sure that everybody was working from home. And then the manager then requested to have calls every single day at 10:30, and basically had told her staff that she can't deal with everybody working from home. So she's going to speak to HR about the possibility of some people working from the office while she's still working at home, despite her Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, saying that only essential travel. Some managers are crazy and wild. But like I said, this pandemic is an opportunity for you guys to get to know some of these managers, because if you thought you knew them before, you only know them when there's a crisis. This is a crisis. So I'm hoping that you guys can understand how professional etiquette is required even during these times when you're doing remote working, from a interview perspective when using video conferencing and things like that. Listen, at the end of the day, let's be real. Even if you're going to have this interview, you can be in your pajamas. Even if they want to do the video, no problem. Just make sure from head to waist you are wearing maybe a shirt. At the bottom, you don't even have to be wearing anything, just your undies. Utilize this time. Like, this is what I'm saying. Like, make sure you're utilizing this time to also reflect on your career and where you're going in the direction. I think one thing that we do as individuals, we take for granted the why there is a work etiquette and why you need the work etiquette. When we sit here talking about boundaries and how to set boundaries, like, it comes from you. And etiquette, what is it? It's just a way to do things. It's having a more professional approach to how you approach the world of work. Now, what I'm going to do is, when this video goes live, which is today, a Tuesday, I'm going to make sure that the Instagram live that I did also is on my Toya Talks Instagram page, which is Toya_Talks, and then my personal Instagram page, which is Toya_Washington, for you guys to go and have a look and see a few things that I spoke about there that I think that you might find useful. Also as well, I'm also getting questions about ticket availability. There's a few more tickets available for Toy Talks Live 2.0, which is on the 11th of July on the Eventbrite page. And what I'll do is I'll put a link in the description box for this episode so you guys can have a look and see if you wanted to attend that. Here we're talking about work etiquette, and there is going to be a nice segment during the Toy Talks Live to do with this, and doing like a role play interview. I don't want to spoil the surprise, but something that I think on a practical level a lot of you will be able to benefit from. There's so many people who maybe haven't had interviews in a really, really long time. So I definitely feel like going to interviews is an opportunity. Yes, you want to get a job, but brushing up on your skills. Like, nobody knows everything, and understanding how the dynamic of interviews are changing and evolving in response to the changing commercial space that is the world of work. Also as well, I want to say that I read all the reviews that you guys leave for me on Apple Podcasts, and I really appreciate you guys taking the time to do that. So please, after listening to this, if you feel encouraged, make sure you go and rate and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts. And thank you everybody else on other podcast platforms that listen to the Toy Talks podcast. Share this with your friends. Like, there's no harm in sharing. Share this podcast, this episode, with your friends. Stay interactive. Obviously, I've got my Twitter handle, Toya_W, and then obviously Snapchat, where I'm more active. My handle is Toya Washington, all one word. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of the Toy Talks podcast, which is work etiquette. My name is Toya Washington, and you have been listening to the Toy Talks podcast.